Welcome back to our teaching. We are doing a series, Torah and the New Testament, and we are examining those verses which are commonly quoted by Christians to try to communicate that we're not supposed to follow the Torah, and expressing our faith in Yeshua as the Messiah. And among passages that are quoted, John chapter 1, verse 17, we did a teaching on that, explaining that verse in detail. Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 and 18. And then Matthew chapter 15. And in this session, we're looking at Peter's vision of Acts chapter 10. And the first thing we're doing is we're looking at the chapter as an overview to see what is communicating to us. And then we're going to break down its details. And so what we have seen so far is that Cornelius, a non-Jew, and he feared God. He was a believer in the God of Israel, sought to honor him and to keep his commandments, but he did not do so being called a God-fearer the way in which the Pharisees taught observance of the Torah. And the way the Pharisees taught observance was to follow the oral law. And the rabbis put their interpretation, called the oral law, above that which is written. So a God-fearer would have believed in the God of Israel, would have kept the Sabbath, wouldn't have eaten pig, but would not follow all of the teachings of the Pharisees or the rabbis or of the scribes. And so one of the teachings in the oral law is that a Jew was to not eat in the house of a non-Jew, because the concern was that the environment of the non-Jew was unclean compared to how the Jew tried to keep the environment of, and particularly, his kitchen. And in order to avoid what the rabbis taught as breaking the Torah, in order to avoid the possibility of breaking what they taught should be followed, they just said for a Jew to not even go into the house of a non-Jew. But when Yeshua died, he broke down the middle wall of partition between Jew and non-Jew, as we're told in Ephesians chapter 2. And the God of Israel wanted both Jew and non-Jew in Messiah to fellowship with each other, to both love him and keep his commandments. And so what's actually going on here is the God of Israel is encouraging Cornelius to go see Peter, and then through this vision, he's going to encourage Peter to have a meal with Cornelius. And given that it's Peter's hang-up, that by being influenced by the oral law teachings of Pharisaic Judaism, he was not be inclined to go to Cornelius' house and eat. And we know this is what he was thinking, because in Acts chapter 10, verse 28, he said, how you know that it is an unlawful thing. You know that it is an unlawful thing for a man that is a Jew to keep company or come into one of another nation or a non-Jew. Well, it does not say in the written Torah that a Jew is forbidden at all times to eat with a non-Jew, but it was an unlawful thing according to the teaching of the Pharisees in following the oral law. But Peter then realized what God was communicating to him, because he says in Acts chapter 10, verse 28, God has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. I should not call Cornelius and those who he sent that I would have fellowship. I should not call them or see them as unclean. And so the issue, once again, that is being dealt with here in Acts 10 is the same issue that Yeshua dealt with in Matthew chapter 15. And the issue is not whether you should follow the Torah or not, but how you are to follow that Torah. And Yeshua did not instruct his disciples that they were to follow the oral Torah exactly as was taught by the rabbis, because if they did, they wouldn't. If they would follow what the rabbis taught, then the disciples of Yeshua would wash their hands before they ate. But Yeshua didn't teach them at all times to wash their hands before they ate. And Yeshua himself, when he ate with the Pharisee in Luke chapter 11, verses 37 through 39, did not wash his hands before he ate. And so the issue in the first century wasn't whether you should follow the Torah or not, but how you should follow the Torah. And the God of Israel was trying to get believers in Yeshua as the Messiah to follow his Torah, because he's the one that gave the Torah at Mount Sinai, and to do it as he wanted it to be done in the new covenant, and that is to follow the Torah, being led by his Spirit. This is the issue of the first century. This is the issue in Yeshua's ministry. This is the issue that Paul is dealing with, and this is the issue in Acts chapter 10. And so let's look at this then in a little greater detail, and emphasizing even some of the things that we have shared with you in the overview. So Acts chapter 10, verse 12, in Peter's vision, it says, he saw all manner of four-footed beasts of the earth and wild beasts, creeping things, and fowls of the air. And he was told, Peter, rise up, kill, and eat. So taken at its surface, taking at face value, if I only read Acts chapter 10, verses 12 and 13, and I took it literally, it would seem to be telling me that I could eat anything that I want. But if I read the verses that way, I would not be doing so with knowledge and understanding of the scriptures or even of the Torah, because we need to realize that Peter was given a vision, and we have already been instructed in the Torah in Numbers chapter 12, verse 6 and verse 8, that when the God of Israel communicates to a person in a dream or a vision, it will be through and in the context of a parable. In other words, it will be through symbols. And these symbols are to be interpreted to get the meaning behind the symbols. And so then, in breaking this down and looking at it in its context, the one that's going to see Peter is Cornelius. And it says in Acts chapter 10, verse 2, that he was a devout man and one that feared God. Well, one that fears God is one that seeks to follow his Torah. In Deuteronomy, in chapter 17 and verse 19, it is written, and it shall be with him, and he shall read therein all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God. What is fearing the Lord his God? To keep all the words of this Torah and these statutes to do them. So in Proverbs, we're told that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So the fear of the Lord, as defined in the Torah, is following his Torah. And then, from the book, The Messianic Idea in Israel by Joseph Klausner on page 479, he explained that in the first century, there were those that were called devout ones, fearers, God-fearers, worshipers of God. And they are seen by Pharisaic Judaism as half proselytes. Now, a full proselyte is a full convert to Judaism. A half proselyte is one that was not regarded by the Pharisees as a full convert, but yet sought to follow certain elements and aspects of the Torah. So it is explained by Joseph Klausner in the Messianic Idea in Israel that these devout ones, God-fearers, are mentioned in the book of Acts. Acts chapter 10 here is one of those places, and by the Jewish historian Josephus. And Klausner explains that the God-fearers, they believed in the God of Israel as the one true God, and they kept the Sabbath, and they did not eat pig, but they did not follow the fullness of Pharisaic Judaism or the oral law teachings. So the fact that Cornelius is said to be a God-fearer, he would not have eaten pig. So if Cornelius doesn't eat pig, why do we think that God is telling Peter to eat pig? And so in Acts chapter 10, verse 11, in Peter's vision, it says there was a certain vessel descending unto him as it had been a great sheet knit at the four corners. And so at the corner of your garment, whether it's a prayer shawl or in the first century, their regular garments on their corners, there were tassels on the corner called tzitzit. And in Numbers, in chapter 15, verses 37 through 41, there's a commandment to wear fringes or tassels on the corner of your garment. But then in Mark chapter 5, verses 25 through 27, the woman with the issue of blood that came to Yeshua, when it says in Mark chapter 5, verse 27, that she touched his garment or the hem of his garment, what she was actually touching was the tassels. She was touching the tzitzit. And the purpose of wearing the tzitzit, as mentioned in Numbers chapter 15, verses 37 to 41, is to remember to keep the commandments or the Torah of the God of Israel. And so the wearing of the tzitzit was an indication that your heart was pursuing after following the Torah. And when the woman of the issue of blood, when she touched the tzitzit, representing the following the Torah of Yeshua, when she reached out for him and grabbed a hold of his tassels or his fringes or his tzitzit, she was whole. So it's faith in Yeshua and loving him and keeping his commandments was her health and her healing. That's our health and healing as well. When we repent of our sins, accept Yeshua as the Messiah, make him Savior and Lord of our lives, and when we then express our faith in him by loving him and keeping his commandments, we are made whole. We are made clean. So in Acts chapter 10, verse 12, Peter in his vision saw four-footed beasts of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, and fowls of the earth. And so it was prophesied that when the northern kingdom went into captivity, and they were taken into captivity by the Assyrians, we are told in Hosea chapter 9, verse 3, that Ephraim will eat unclean things in Assyria or in their captivity. And then in Ezekiel, in chapter 8, in verses 6, 9, and 10, it is written, he said furthermore to me, Son of man, see thou what they do, even the great abominations that the house of Israel commits here, that I should go far off from my sanctuary, but turn you yet again, and you will see greater abominations. Verse 9. He said, go in and behold the wicked abominations that they do. So I went in and saw, and behold, every form of creeping thing, abominable beasts, and all the idols of the house of Israel portrayed upon the wall round about. So the things in Peter's vision, they are representative in Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 10, as idols of the house of Israel. And the northern kingdom, they were taken captive by the Assyrians, and there's a prophecy regarding them in Hosea in chapter 8. In verses 11 and 12, because Ephraim, or the northern kingdom, has made many altars to sin, altars shall be made unto him to sin. I've written to him the great things of my Torah, but they were counted as a strange thing. And so we are then told that given that the northern kingdom, they went after other gods, through the first king of the northern kingdom, Jeroboam, they built an alternative system of worship. Rather than going to Jerusalem, Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 16, which 3 times a year all the males were required to do, that Jeroboam built places of worship instead of having the people go to Jerusalem, and Dan and Bethel. And they set up what's regarded as a golden calf system of worship. They worshiped idols. And so it says in Psalm chapter 115, verse 8, they that make them idols are likened unto them. And so idols were represented by creeping things and abominable things in Ezekiel in chapter 8 and verse 10. And then, because the northern kingdom went after idols, they are regarded and they are described as the idols that are associated with them. Hosea chapter 2, verse 18, in that day I will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, with the fowls of the heaven, and with the creeping things of the earth. And I will betroth you unto me forever. Yea, I will betroth you unto me in righteousness and judgment and loving kindness and in mercies. I will betroth you unto me in faithfulness, and you will know the Lord. And so, when you go after idols, you are likened unto beasts of the field, fowls of the heavens, and the creeping things of the earth. Ezekiel chapter 8 and verse 10. The northern kingdom went after idols through their king Jeroboam. And they ate unclean things in Assyria, Hosea chapter 9 and verse 3. And those who go after idols are like them. And so when Peter's given a vision, we're told in Numbers chapter 12, verse 6 and verse 8, that the God of Israel is going to speak in dark speeches, in parable. And so, therefore, the God of Israel is trying to get Peter to have table fellowship with Cornelius. And he's doing this by Acts chapter 10, verse 13, telling him to arise, kill, and eat. Now, we go back to Genesis chapter 31, verse 54. It says, Jacob offered sacrifice. The word sacrifice is the Hebrew word zabak. And when he made a zabak, a sacrifice, that then associated with it was a covenant meal or a thank offering. So Jacob offered a zabak, and he called his brethren to eat bread. So zabak, which is associated with a sacrifice or a slaughter, when you did a zabak, a kill, then following the kill, the zabak, you would eat, have a meal. And now in Leviticus chapter 3, verse 1, it says, if your oblation be a sacrifice, oblation is the Hebrew word korban, an offering. If your offering be a zabak, if your offering be a zabak, Leviticus chapter 3, verse 1, of a shalem, a peace offering. Now a shalem was an offering that was done for alliance or friendship. So if I'm going to make a shalem offering, a peace offering, a meal that's associated with alliance or a friendship, I must then bring the offering and I must kill the offering, zabak. And so this is what Peter is told to do, because the God of Israel wants him to have table fellowship with Cornelius and to eat with him. So it says in Leviticus chapter 3, verse 1, if his korban, his offering, is a sacrifice, a zabak, of a shalem, a peace offering that is associated with a sacrifice of alliance or friendship, a covenant meal, then Leviticus chapter 3, verse 2, he is to kill it, and it's to be an offering made by fire unto the Lord. And so this is the kind of instruction that the God of Israel was giving him in a vision, in symbolic language, that initially Peter did not understand the meaning of the vision, because in a literal sense, he knew it was against the Torah to eat unclean. So that's why in Acts chapter 10, verse 17, it says, Peter doubted in himself what is the meaning of the vision. And then it goes on to say that when men was sent from Cornelius, he made an inquiry for Peter's house, and he stood before the gate. And he called and asked whether Simon, whose surname was Peter, was lodging there. While Peter thought on the vision, the Spirit said to him, Behold, 3 men seek you. Arise, therefore, and get you down and go with them, doubting nothing. So what was it that he was not to doubt? He was not to doubt to go with those who came to Peter's door. He was not to doubt to go with them. And going with them, he was going to go to their house. He was going to eat with them. He was not to doubt about going with them to eat. And so then it goes on to say, verse 21, Then Peter went down to the men which were sent unto him from Cornelius and said, Behold, I am he who you seek. What is the cause that you are come? And they said, Cornelius, the centurion, a just man, one that fears God. So he's following the Torah. He keeps the Sabbath. He does not eat pig. And he's of a good report among all the nation of the Jews, was warned of God by a holy angel to send for you into his house and to hear words of you. Then called he them in and lodged them, and on the morrow Peter went away with them. So Peter is going with them, and certain brethren from Joppa accompanied them. And the morrow, after they entered into Caesarea, Peter is now going to Caesarea, Cornelius waited for them, and had called together his kinsmen and near friends. And so this is his personal friends. They're all waiting there for Peter. They're going to have a celebration. They're going to have a meal together. Verse 25, And as Peter was coming in, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshipped him. But Peter took him up, saying, Stand up, I myself am also a man. And as he talked with him, he went in and found many that were come together. And so now Peter says, you know how that it is an unlawful thing for a man that is a Jew to keep company or come into one of another nation. Well, once again, it was not a violation of written Torah, but it was taught by the rabbis that a Jew was not to go into the house of a non-Jew. In the sayings of the fathers, Pirkei Avot, the instruction was to put a fence around the Torah. And for a Jew to not eat with the non-Jew, this is what's called a fence around the Torah. And in the Talmud, in Avodah Zarah 37 to 43, is where the teaching is of the fence for a Jew to not associate with a non-Jew. And it was for 2 main reasons. Number 1, is to not run the risk of eating non-kosher food, and secondly, to not encourage social relationships so that there would be intermarriage between a Jew and a non-Jew. This is why and how a fence was put around the Torah regarding the interaction of Jew and non-Jew. But the God of Israel, through the redemptive work of the Messiah, he is going to bring down the middle wall of partition between Jew and non-Jew. And in Messiah, he wants them to have table fellowship and to follow his Torah. And so in encouraging Peter to set a good example, the instruction was for him to go with the men that came for him, to go to Caesarea and to have a fellowship meal, and to not regard Cornelius and his people as unclean. And so this is the understanding of Acts chapter 10 in looking at the chapter in the fullness of its Hebraic context. Remember, Yeshua said in John chapter 14, verse 15, "If you love me, keep my commandments." Follow his Torah. Shalom.